Welcome back, everybody. Today I'm going to discuss three cameras a lot of people have questions about. One is your full frame camera. This is the Canon R6. This is a Aps-c camera. It's the Canon 70D. And then I'm going to talk about it. We're videoing with it right now. It is the Micro Four Thirds camera. Each one has a different sensor size, and each one has pluses and minuses, and I'm going to go over each of those so you kind of get a little bit more of an understanding of how they work. Start with full frame. This is the Canon R6, full frame, Nikon, Sony. There's a lot of manufacturers of full frame. Now with full frame, most people are going to say that's your best quality, and it is the largest sensor. That's the difference between the three cameras. Full frame has the largest sensor, Aps-c is a little bit smaller, and then Micro Four Thirds is even smaller than that. So, the bigger the sensor, the better the quality size that you're going to get in the image in most cases, especially in low light. A lot of people complain about low light with the smaller camera, the Micro Four Thirds, but it's not as bad as some people make it out to be, but sometimes it is. It's kind of hard to explain, but I'll get to that. So first of all, with your full frame camera, a few things. A few good things about it is your quality. Most people are going to say it is the best quality, and it generally is. Kind of like shooting medium format in the film days versus 35mm. The bigger the film, the higher the quality. You've got more area to capture image. Your lenses are sometimes probably considered to be a little sharper. Some people may argue that. Now, the one thing about full frame, a lot of wedding photographers use these. I'm a wedding photographer mostly, and I shoot most of all my weddings with full frame camera. Now, I have shot plenty of weddings with Aps-c cameras before, but full frame is the way to go on weddings. Now, the downside to a full frame is they are expensive. This camera, when it came out, I believe it was about $2,500. As you know, I like to get a lot of bang for my buck, so I got it refurbished from Canon, so I didn't pay $2,500 for the body on mine. I paid less than that, but I got it from Canon refurbished, so it's been fun. Now, another complaint about them is they're very heavy. They're heavy cameras, and the lenses are big and heavy. And the RF lenses for this, there are a few that are lower priced, but some of the, like there is a 24-105 f2.8, I believe it's about $3,100. That's just for the lens. There's a 28-70 f2.0, it's about $2,900. So you can see where I'm going with the lenses. They are high dollar for full frame, but you are going to get that full frame quality. You're going to get the nice depth of field, the nice bokeh that people talk about, the blurry background, you know what I'm talking about. Hey guys, I just want to take this second of your time. If you guys would please hit like and subscribe, it would go a long ways toward helping our channel and help us keep making these videos. Thank you. They will do video, they do everything. But again, if you're carrying one around all day, I've gotten to the point, because I'm 55, that when I'm shooting a wedding, I will shoot the wedding all the way up till we cut the cake, full frame. And then once we cut the cake, I'll either switch to a smaller Aps-c or even go down to my Micro Four Thirds, and that's the one we're videoing with, and I'll show it to you in a minute. But these cameras, you're going to pay for them. And they are expensive. They do a lot. They are fantastic cameras. I love it. This R6 is probably my favorite camera I've ever had. But it does get heavy. Now, the one thing about this particular Canon R6 is it has an adapter. That's what's on the front of the camera now. And you can put the old EF lenses on it. You don't have to buy the new RF glass. So, that's good and bad, because they're selling those, and they're all used, of course, mostly, but they're a lot cheaper. They're great quality. There's no drop in loss. Usually when you put an adapter on something, you get a big drop in quality or something like that, but that's not the case with the EF glass. They work fine. They focus fine. It works great. No flaws. I haven't had any problems with it anyway. Once you go, let's see, I will take this off. If you can see in there, I'm not sure if you can see the size of that. Oh, you can't see the sensor in there anyway. Sorry, I've got the shutter. I keep the shutter closed so that when I change the lenses that no dust gets on the sensor. So anyway, that didn't help much. But anyway, Nikon, Sony, Canon, they're probably the three biggest makers of the full frame cameras. Now, from there, you can go to the Aps-c cameras. Now, this is a Canon Aps-c. So if you put a 100mm lens on here, it's got a 1.6 crop factor because of the size of the sensor. That's the mirror. Sensor's behind it. So if I put a 100mm lens on here, I'm actually going to have a 160 focal length, where if I put a 100 on the full frame, it's actually going to be a 100. Now, they make EFS glass for the crop sensors. You can't put an EFS crop sensor lens on a full frame camera. You can, however, if you buy a APS-C camera and you're wanting to go full frame in the future, you can put the full frame lenses on here, and that way when you do graduate to a full frame camera, you don't have to worry about buying all new lenses. You can just transfer those lenses straight over to the new camera, no problem. They do have APS-C lenses. They're a little cheaper. They're not quite as good. They're not bad. I've got plenty of them. They work great, but you can't really just put them onto the full frame camera. I think there's some kind of way you can rig it, but even if you do, the lens isn't big enough to cover the whole sensor, so it's really just a waste of time. So I wouldn't recommend doing it at all, even if you find a way to do it. Now these cameras, this 70D, I think when it came out, it was about $1,500. This is a long time ago. I don't remember. So it was about $1,000 retail cheaper than the full frame. Now the APS-C sensor in here is smaller than the full frame, but it will do fine. I mean, you can do 20 by 30s on this and be fine. This camera right here has 20 megapixels. They make them with more. Now, the one thing some people don't understand about megapixels is they'll say, well, I got 50 megapixels, or my iPhone or whatever, my Samsung has 65 megapixels. Well, that's a little bit overblown. The sensor size is way more important than how many megapixels you have. One thing, this Canon R6 is full frame, but it only has 20 megapixels, same as this one, but it's a bigger sensor, so each individual pixel is bigger. So when you're doing low light, you get better quality under low light than you would from, say, having 45 pixels on here. I think the Canon R5 has 45 megapixels, and the Canon R5 is a fantastic camera, but in low light, you're going to get about a half a stop better, in my opinion, quality out of this camera because it has less megapixels. Now for detail, if you're doing something that you're going to blow up huge and need a lot of detail to it, that's where your megapixels will come in. That's where you would want 45 megapixels on this sensor. But most of the time you're not going to notice a difference unless you're printing billboards, or you're cropping in a tremendous amount. So, don't get too caught up in megapixels. Worry a lot more about sensor sizes. A lot of phones nowadays will say, this iPhone has, I don't know how many they have now. I have the iPhone 12 now. I think it has like 12 megapixels. I don't even remember. But I think some of the Samsungs are 20, 30 megapixels. But what they don't tell you, and I don't even think you can find out, is what sensor size it is. It's a very small sensor. So when you shoot the picture, it looks good on your phone. You can put it on your computer and it looks pretty good. But if you zoom in or pixel peep, whatever you call it, you'll start to see it break down. And that's because the sensor isn't big enough. That's why photographers don't go around carrying cameras to take pictures with. We use real cameras because the sensor is where it's at. So back to the APS-C. This camera will do pretty good in low light. I've shot hundreds of weddings with these before, and they do a fine job. Again, not as good as these, but they do a fine job. These, the one thing that I do like, these are both 20 megapixel cameras. But let's say this was a 45 megapixel and this one was a 20. When you're taking pictures, you're hardly ever going to need that many megapixels. So if you're shooting thousands of pictures and you're putting all these megapixels in, you're using a lot of space on your hard drive. You're having to store all these extra huge size files that you really have no use for. It's just taking up space. So, and there's a program, actually you can do it in Lightroom. You can do it in Topaz. If you absolutely must upsize a picture, you can run it through that program and you can upsize it and add more pixels that way, and it works pretty good. So I have ran into that one time where I did that. I shot a group of 80 kids. I mentioned this a few weeks ago. We had a flash problem. We were shooting a bunch of kids, 80 of them, and couldn't get the flash high enough, so I had to go available light. I had to shoot 3200, which the R6 did fine with no grain. And then I ran it through Topaz. It looked decent, but I ran it through Topaz anyway, just so I could give the school a bigger image. They're only going to put it in the yearbook. But I thought if they ever blow it up on the wall, it'll still look good. So that's why I ran it through Topaz before I gave it to them. So if you ever need to go bigger, you can technically make it bigger. But these cameras, these little APS-C cameras, I've probably shot more pictures with APS-C than I have any other camera except for maybe film. I shot with film for probably 25 years, but these little cameras, they do a pretty good job on video. This one does 1080p. I don't think it does 4K. This camera will do 4K 60. What's really good at video are the little micro four thirds camera, and I'll explain that one in a minute. It's kind of a different type of camera. A lot of people love their micro four thirds, and I kind of like them too. Canon doesn't make them, but it's a Lumix brand that I've got that I like, and it does certain things. Well, it's like anything else. You know, one camera is always going to have pros and cons, and another camera is going to be the same way. This one might outdo this one in some way. This one might be better in some ways than this one. Like this one is lighter than this one and easier to carry around after 6 hours of the wedding, where this one's going to get me better low light. So you can kind of see it was one way here and another way there. So it's whatever you're trying to accomplish at the time, you can get it done. These are cheaper, especially now that they're used. You can get a 70D now for a couple $100, and I use this. I think this is my third or fourth backup that I use. They're great cameras, nothing wrong with them. They really are. They're dependable. And these Canon cameras, like the D, they have a 10D all the way to a 90D. Those cameras, they're like indestructible. I don't think I've ever, knock on wood, I've never had one break, and I've had the 30D, 40D, the 50D, the 60D, and the 70D. And then I jumped to the full frame. I skipped the 80D and the 90D, although I've heard they are great cameras, especially the 90D is supposed to be fantastic with video. I think the 70D was the first one to have dual pixel autofocus. And those are just Canon. Now, again, Nikon, Sony, a lot of different manufacturers, Fuji, they all make different cameras. Fuji makes a medium format, which is even bigger than your full frame, but they're about $8 grand. So it's more of a studio camera. Most people won't have a need for one of those unless you're just in a studio all the time and just need that giant medium format sensor. I think they're about 100 megapixels, but it's a giant sensor, so it can take it. You know, having said that, I've shot so many weddings with these little cameras, they last forever. The one thing about the lens now, if you are, say, if you're trying to go wide and you're trying to do a wide shot, you're going to have a little harder time with an Aps-c, because if you put a 24 millimeter on here, it's going to be about a 38 or a 40 because of the crop factor. If I put a 24 on here, it's going to be 24. So you kind of have to watch that. But on the other hand, you know, architecture, or you're shooting mountains or whatever you're trying to photograph, and you want that reach, then you'll find that you may like the Aps-c better, because if you put a 400 millimeter lens on here, all of a sudden it's going to become a 640 millimeter zoom, and it's cheaper obviously to buy a 400 than it is a 640. So you gain in a little bit that way. So again, plus and minuses, pluses and minuses. I think the 90D may do 4K. It's a newer camera, so it probably does. I don't hardly ever even video in 4K. Again, it's kind of like the megapixel thing. It takes up so much room. But these are a little cheaper. They're a little lighter. The lenses are a little less, unless you go with the professional full frame lenses, and even then you can get the EF, and they're all used right now, and you can get them pretty good prices on them. So from there, we're going to jump down to the micro four thirds. I'm going to show it to you. It's videoing right now, but let me explain what it does first. It's a little smaller than this. Now, I've got a battery grip on mine because they go through batteries kind of fast, especially when you're videoing. And I've also got a battery grip I keep on here. Kind of like you see on here, I have a battery grip so I can keep two batteries in here. I always keep extra batteries in the camera if I can, and keep them in my pocket, because you don't want to be, you know, a couple hundred yards away from your camera at a wedding and all your batteries die, and you don't want to have to run back to your camera bag to get more batteries. So keep them with you. That way you don't have to delay the bride and groom, because you don't want to do that at a wedding. But a micro four thirds camera, people complain, well, they're not good in low light. And technically, if you just flip it up to 6400 and take a picture, it's not going to be near as good as what this will do at 6400. We've got a video coming out soon that's going to show you the difference. And when I got to 3200 and I cropped in 100%, you can see a huge difference between a full frame and a micro four thirds. Now, one thing about the micro four thirds camera is video. They are amazing at video. I say they are just as good as full frame at video. One thing, it's got a little sensor in it. I'm not sure if the sensor is half the size or 1/4 of the size as a full frame. I've looked this up. I've seen the data. I've had people tell me this, and I'm not quite sure. I just can't find the information to be exact. So if you know, let me know. I just can't seem to get the information. But the one thing about it is with that smaller sensor, the stabilization, if you're vlogging, it's almost like you've got your camera on a gimbal, because I think it's a smaller sensor. They can keep it so stable that you can handhold a video and look like you've got a bigger camera on a gimbal, and it's perfectly smooth. It's amazing how it works. And as far as pictures go, 95% of the time, 95% of every picture that I can shoot with this full frame Canon, I can shoot with a micro four thirds, 90 to 95%. Customer's not going to notice the difference. Now, you photographers are going to probably notice a little difference, but the customer's not going to notice the difference. Again, I had a video a few weeks ago, and I was talking about where I shot the 80 kids. That would have been one I would not have wanted to do on the micro four thirds camera because of the small sensor. Even though it's also a 20 megapixel camera, the sensor is at best half the size. 80 kids, that would have been about half as good a quality for 80 kids, and that's where the detail would really show. Now, if it was a headshot of somebody, you probably wouldn't notice the difference. Even some pros might not even notice the difference if you're doing like an 8x10 and you're doing a headshot. But the thing about the micro four thirds is they're very small. At a wedding, after about 4 hours, 5 hours, I can put this big heavy thing down, grab that micro four thirds. The lenses on the micro four thirds are small, they're lightweight, and they're not near as expensive as either the Aps-c or the full frame, no matter what brand you're going with. So they're lightweight, they're much cheaper, and the sensor is stable. It is very, very stable. And it does an excellent job on video. Focusing, that's where your Canon and your Sony, the new full frames, and I think even the Aps-c on Sony have the new focusing, where you used to have to roll a dial. Like on here, you would roll the dial, you'd have boxes, and you would find your subject and you put the dot on and you'd focus. Well, now if the subject walks into your picture, these lights onto the eyeball and just focus. So it makes focusing much easier. There are a few times that does turn into a pain, because if you're trying to shoot a bride, somebody walks in the way and it focuses on somebody else. Sometimes it has a tendency to not want to get back to where you want it to go. But that's a problem for another day. But that's a problem I've had occasionally, not very often, but occasionally. But a micro four thirds, if I am shooting just normal pictures, it'll do a fine job 90% of the time. I love the size of it. I love being able to switch out at a wedding. It's so much easier to photograph carrying that light camera around. Put a flash on it, or put an off-camera flash, put a trigger on top of the camera, and you are good to go. You know, with that said, I hope I answered some of the questions about the full frame, the Aps-c, and the micro four thirds cameras. I'll put a picture of the micro four thirds at the end so you can see it. I think most of you guys know what it looks like. I just had to want to answer the questions today so you guys would know what the differences are. So again, I'll go over it real quick. Full frame, expensive and heavy. Aps-c, kind of middle of the road, fairly expensive, more expensive than micro four thirds, less expensive than full frame, not as heavy as full frame, heavier than micro four thirds, so you see where I'm going with it. And your micro four thirds, it is going to be so much lighter, and it's a lot cheaper. Your lenses, I can carry 5 or 6 of those lenses. They're small, they're lightweight, they weigh almost nothing. I've got a Sigma 24 to 105 for this Canon R6. It probably weighs more than all of my micro four thirds lenses combined to put on a scale at one time, probably by a pound. So that Sigma is a great lens, but it's a heavy lens. So with that said, don't worry too much about what camera that I've got to buy this new camera so I can get the best pictures. That's not really the case. You can get a good picture. The Lumix G9 that I've got is the first one, not the new one. I think it came out like 2017. This Canon 70D probably came out 2016, somewhere in there. I don't remember exactly. But I've got cameras that came out in like 2008 that I still use. So you don't have to have the latest and greatest to get a great shot. You just have to know what you're doing. Once you understand the basics of photography, you can do that. So, and like I said, each camera kind of serves its own purpose. And hopefully, if you guys have any questions, you know, just my email's at the bottom. Just let me know if you have a question. Just don't feel like you have to run out and wait. Like I think Canon is talking about putting the Canon R5 Mark II out. It'll probably be $5,000 guessing for the body. You don't have to rush out and buy that camera so that you can go, oh, I can get the best pictures now. I have the Canon R5 Mark II whenever it comes out. That's not the case. It's not at all. You can get great pictures with Aps-c, micro four thirds. Just know what you're doing and you'll be fine. A flash is a very important thing that a lot of people forget, and I didn't bring a flash. I need to do more videos on flashes because I think that's the one area that most, especially the new photographers nowadays, the younger guys, really miss out. They don't use the flash enough. A lot of them like to do what's called available light, and there's a time and a place for available light, but there's also a big need for a flash. Because what a flash does is if you've got dark circles in the eyes, and if you're shooting available light, a lot of times your eyes are inset. You're going to get a little bit of a shadow minimum. Well, a flash is going to pop in there and light the eyes up. And the eyes are the most important part of the picture. And that's for, I don't care if you're full frame Aps-c micro four thirds, that flash in the eyes is going to make all the difference in the world. I'll take a micro four thirds with a good flash over the best full frame with no flash any day of the week. So anyway, if you guys have any questions about any of these cameras that I've talked about, just send me a message and let me know and I'll help you out. You guys have a good day. Thanks. All right, so I forgot to show you guys the picture of the micro four thirds camera. This is the Lumix G9, the version 1, not the version 2. Now it looks bigger because I have the battery grip on the bottom. If I take the battery grip off, you can see how small that is. And this is the equivalent of a 24 to 70 2.8, and you see how small that is. So these cameras are super small. I keep the battery grip on it because I don't want to run out of battery, and it's not that heavy. The batteries aren't even that big. So, but this is the micro four thirds. All right, this is the micro four thirds with the battery grip. This is the Aps-c without a battery grip. With the battery grip, this camera is a little bit bigger. You can tell it weighs a little bit more, but it looks pretty close to the same here, but technically it's a little bit bigger, and the full frame is quite a bit bigger. All right, so now you guys know why I like to switch at the wedding from the giant full frame camera to the little micro four thirds. It weighs probably a third, maybe a fourth of what that full frame camera does with the lens, the battery grip, and everything. So again, this is the Lumix G9 micro four thirds that I like to use. It does a great job at receptions. It'll do 90% of everything that a bigger camera will. So anyway, I just wanted to show you the camera, so I forgot to show it to you a while ago. So there you go.